All right, good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, October 14th, 2024. I've got 7:03, so we will go ahead and call to order the meeting of the Committee of the Whole. We will start first with items from Council Office, and for an update on the Community Reinvestment Area Housing Council appointment, we will turn to President Bowers.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Weaver. I wanted to just make sure that we address this tonight. Council Clerk Van Meter posted a public notice regarding the Community Reinvestment Area Housing Council, that council is seeking applicants for seat 3, one seat on the CRA HC, which would be a 3-year term on that on that board. We posted, Mr. Van Meter posted this back on September 20th. We have not yet had any applications, unfortunately, for this posting. We have requested applications by October 18th of this week, the end of the week, at noon. And so there's information posted on the website. And so a little bit about the CRA-HC. It's a board of 7 members who work closely with the city's Department of Economic Development. The Housing Council conducts annual property inspections for Gahanna's CRAs, acts as an appellate board for tax abatement disputes, and recommends approval of the annual tax abatement report filed with the state. This board meets approximately 1 time a year. Sometimes it could potentially be slightly more frequently, but a relatively low time commitment and an important volunteer role. So if people are interested in getting involved on this, they are encouraged to log on to the website, visit onboard.gahanna.gov/apply, or inquire through Clerk Van Meter by calling 614-342-4091. So I wanted to just bring that to everyone's attention and then ask my colleagues as well to make sure that they're distributing that notice to their network so that we can solicit an applicant for this seat. All right, thank you. And if there's any questions or any discussion.
Any discussion on this item?
Working on a couple, trying to.
All right. Thank you, President Bowers, and turn to you as well for the next item.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so we just wanted to share with you a quick report out from the first steering committee meeting for the strategic plan that was hosted last week. As you all know, this is an important document, an important process that I think is going to be help guide the city for the next 5 to 10 years. And so to that end, Finance Chair Schnetzer and I wanted to share just a little bit of information with you included on the agenda today. I overall wanted to report out that the process was very well organized by our consultant Planning Next and facilitated by Senior Director Miranda Vollmer. Very well facilitated and gave us very clear direction on intended next steps. So I very much wanted to express my appreciation and give my colleagues a little bit of an understanding of what happened at that first steering committee meeting. And if Mr. Schnetzer has anything to add, he's welcome to.
I'll just add that you're very kind to include me in some reference of producing this, which we both know that you did all of this. So thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you to you both. Are any questions or discussion on this? All right. Seeing none, thank you both for the update. Next, we have a joint resolution and proclamation designating October 28th, 2024 as honoring First Responders Day in the city. President Bowers.
Yes, sorry. One more item from me tonight. We have a proposed draft resolution here. This would be a proposed draft joint resolution and proclamation, which would designate October 28th as honoring First Responders Day. We have recognized First Responders Day or First Responders Week here in the city previously. This is a first draft, and I wanted to note that Jessica Hiltz, our communications analyst, has been working with Administrative Assistant Jen McBroom in the Mayor's office, and a recent draft also from the Mayor's office has been circulated that includes a lot more statistics and data. So I know that Ms. Hiltz and Ms. McBroom are working together to reconcile these two resolutions, and so we should have a new draft that actually gets submitted for adoption next Monday. We have been in touch with Mifflin Township Fire, and Chief Dunleavy and Trustee Kavanagh have indicated that they would like to join us. An invitation has also been extended to Chief Spence and GPD. So looking forward to celebrating our first responders in our community.
Wonderful. Thank you, President Bowers. Any discussion? All right, on for next week on the regular agenda then?
Yes, since we'll have a different document to present to you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have items from the mayor's office. Madam Mayor. We were looking at a couple joint resolution opportunities. Those are forthcoming, is my understanding.
Yes, I believe there are drafts that have been presented to the clerk of council's office, and those will be most likely presented at the next committee of the whole meeting.
Short and sweet. Wonderful. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll ask for discussion, but not anticipating any at the moment. But okay. Next up, we have items from the Department of Finance. Good evening, Director Burry.
Good evening.
Thank you for being here.
First action item that I have for you is the resolution accepting the tax rates and amounts. This comes from the Franklin County Budget Commission and basically sets our 2.4 rate, allocating it amongst the bond retirement fund, general fund, and the police pension fund. This is the result of the tax budget, like I said, and this gives me the authority to go ahead and file this with the County Budget Commission once passed.
Any discussion on this item? All right, since it's a resolution, on for consent next week. All right, thank you, Director. Next item, please.
So the second item is a request for supplemental appropriations. This is for the TIF funds and the bond retirement fund. We received the final property tax settlement for the year. Then we calculate by parcel the percentage that's due for revenue sharing agreements. In this case, it would have been the revenue sharing agreement with Mifflin Township. There was an error when the budget was loaded, so the improper amount was placed in there. So requesting a supplemental appropriation for the Johnstown Road TIF in the amount of $113,661. And then for the bond retirement fund, just auditor and treasurer fees just came in a little bit higher than what we had anticipated. So requesting a supplemental appropriation for $1,150 for the bond retirement fund.
Okay. Thank you, Director. Any discussion? Yes, Mrs. McGregor.
What's the balance in the Johnstown Road TIF?
I could get back to you on that one.
Okay.
There's 10 of them. I don't keep all the balances in my head.
That's fine.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I guess,
Mrs. Bowers?
Director, could you help me understand that error that resulted in the $113,000?
Yes.
Difference.
So the original amount was calculated within our workbook, but then when we went to the budget import, there was a transposition of a number. So rather than the amount due to Mifflin Township being imported, another auditor and treasurer fee amount was imported. So instead of 116 or whatever that amount was, it was $3,800.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Director.
Mm-hmm.
Any other discussion on this item? All right, on for first next week and then consent on the 4th? All right, thank you. Anything else for the Committee of the Whole before we turn things over to Finance? All right, seeing none, we will adjourn Committee of the Whole, and I'll turn things over to Chairman Schnetzer.
Thank you, sir. 12 minutes for a committee meeting might be a record.
We started 2 minutes late.
We did.
So, Directors Burry and Volmer, no pressure. But I guess we've got to beat 10 minutes in order to win. All right, let's commence Finance Committee for October 14th, 2024. We just have one item on the agenda today. It's a discussion item, presentation of the fiscal year 2025 operating budget. And with that, directors, you have the floor.
Thank you. On behalf of Mayor Jadwin and the directors behind me, we are excited to present to you the 2025 budget. I first just wanted to give a couple thanks to Director Burry, and in the audience is also Finance Manager April Kincaid. There she is. Many thanks to them for their patience, dedication, and work to put together all of our requests, and for April for putting up with Kevin along the way as well. Joanne is working on, here we go. So new this year, we updated the schedule that we are going to use this year. So tonight, Director Burry will present the 2025 estimated revenues and planned expenditures by fund. Next week, Senior Director Schultz will present the capital budget, and I will present the 2025 staffing requests. From there, we'll present operating, capital, and staffing budgets by department each Monday through November 25th. On the slide, you'll see when the public hearings are scheduled for as well. We would respectfully request that all comments and amendments are finalized at the December 2nd meeting. That will allow Director Burry and her team to run the amended budget through to get the documents to council office in advance of the December 9th meeting, where we will review the 2025 amended budget for a vote on December 16th. Any questions on the schedule?
Council? Any questions pertaining to the schedule that's presented? All right, seeing none.
So we'll go ahead and get started here. Overall budget assumptions is that we'll have continued economic growth and stability. And then looking at 2024, there are a number of one-time initiatives in the 2024 budget, which the administration planned on completing over multiple years. These include the strategic and economic development plans, code updates, staffing study and plan, and of course, the construction and completion of the new Civic Center, among some others. So the completion of these initiatives will determine the city's path forward, and changes that may come from these initiatives will likely come at some point beyond 2025. So just business as usual for 2025, not requesting any one-time initiatives with this budget, just keeping current operations in place and going. So what we have here is the impact on fund balance, looking across multiple funds, the general fund, the tax increment fund, and then the special revenue funds in total. So looking at the total impact on all of fund balance, we are looking at kind of moving from the left to the right of the document to explain how this kind of works. So on the far left-hand side is the 2024 beginning unencumbered fund balance. So this is actual cash balances that we started 2024 with, less any unencumbered balances or what's sitting open on POs. The revenue and expenditure budgets for 2024 are the original budget, plus any requested amendments during 2024 to either increase those or decrease those. So what this does is it assumes that we're going to collect only the revenue that was projected, and we're going to spend every dollar appropriated. And we know that history tells us that we're probably going to bring in a little bit more and spend a little bit less. But the way this model works is it assumes that we're going to collect only what we projected, and we're going to spend every dollar. So if that were to happen, we would end 2025 with approximately 69.7 million of unreserved fund balance that could be used for 2025. Looking at the planned revenues and expenditures for 2025, revenue coming in at 102 million, expenditures 107 million. So requesting to use about 5.3 million of unreserved fund balance. Except for the general fund, the planned resources, our revenues are coming in higher than expenditures. So that will be the result of 1.4 million in excess revenue for the general fund.
Joanne, maybe this is jumping ahead to some prepared comments that you have, but would it be of benefit to anyone up here or perhaps those viewing at home to make, when I hear 100 million, I know that's all funds under the city's kind of purview. Would it make sense to break out, not line item by line item, but just broadly, like general fund, which is largely tax supported versus enterprise funds, which are,
Yep, we're gonna hit on that in 1 second here.
thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah, Ms. Bowers.
And I apologize if I missed this, Director Burry, but when I've heard the term zero basis budgeting, are you familiar with this phrase?
Yeah, so basically what zero-based budgeting is you don't start with any history. You basically start with all zeros, and you just plan on what you think you're going to bring in and what you're going to expend. So it kind of eliminates any historical back view of anything and just says, we're going to start the year only at zero with what we want and what we need. That doesn't work so well. We kind of need that history. We need to know where we've been to decide where we want to go. So I would probably never recommend zero-based budgeting for a government because we need that history to help us along the way.
Anything further from council on that, just on the fund overview? Seeing none? All right, thank you.
So now we're just going to look at the general fund impact and the fund balance and how that bumps up against our general fund balance reserve policy. So we're anticipating about 35.6 million in general fund operations. 25% of that is 8.9 million. So rounding the emergency reserve to 9 million. This is an increase of about $550,000 compared to 2024. And then going kind of to the middle there and then just analyzing where we're projecting 2025 fund balance to end at 27.7 million. Backing out that $9 million reserve leaves about 18.7 million, about 3 times the unreserved amount that's required minimum by policy at 6 months, a little over 6 months. And then dollars, that translates into about 12.7 million above what the minimum unreserved fund balance is by policy.
Anything from council on general fund balance? All right, thank you.
I guess not to be pedantic, but if I'm looking at this, just to spell it out, so we have the mandatory 6 million roughly reserved.
9 million for emergency reserve?
Oh, yes, 9 million from emergency reserve, plus the 6 million for the 2 months of operations.
Correct.
So then the additional amount on top of that, that 12.7, about 4.25 months roughly?
Yeah, about.
Okay, all right, thank you, Joanne.
So now looking at just governmental funds citywide in revenue. So going back to your question, Mr. Schnetzer, about how the makeup of this revenue base is. So because these are governmental funds, we have about 75% coming from taxes, 62% of that being income tax and 13% being property taxes and pilot payments, followed by the remainder of the revenue. We're going to go in to a little bit of a deep dive on that income tax projection. As far as the real estate taxes, those are estimated by the county auditor. We have our interest and investment income, which we use our Red Tree investment advisors to determine what those estimates might look like. And then, of course, our charges for services are just from our departments, determining on what the need is for the year. So this is governmental funds only.
Can I ask a clarifying question on the interest and investment income?
Yes.
That 6.8 million, I just heard you say that's just governmental funds. Does the 6.8 million include any earnings on fund balance in enterprise funds?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I remember when that was a much smaller number.
Yes. It's going to decline, so it's only, short windfalls. So now looking at the enterprise funds. So no surprise here, this is for our stormwater, water, and sewer operations, with 96% of that being for charges for services. So the main factor that drives that charges for services number is the City of Columbus rates. Gahanna purchases water and sewer services from the City of Columbus and delivers these services to residents and business owners. So the rates are set at an amount to cover those services from the City of Columbus, as well as to meet our mandatory requirement to maintain and improve on the infrastructure that delivers that clean water and safely removes that wastewater. You'll see that we are requesting to use a portion of fund balance in those enterprise funds, and that's kind of a strategic to allow for rates to kind of flow without huge spikes, if we could offset some of that with some of that fund balance.
So we're buying down the rate a little bit, is what you're saying?
A little bit.
Okay. All right. Anything from council on the enterprise funds? All right, moving on.
So we're going to look at expenditures across all funds. We're not going to break it out between proprietary and governmental. The types of expenditures are the same, even though the purposes are a little bit different. So across all funds, again, we're at that $107 million number. Salaries and benefits and contract services being the highest. I do want to point out that this contract services number is higher than salaries and wages because we are including the enterprise funds, which includes like a $19 million in contracted services, with about 89% of that, or $16.4 million, estimated to be due to the City of Columbus for those water and sewer services. So it looks a little offset, but that's why, because we're including those enterprise funds in those amounts. Looking over at the right-hand side, this is a nice split of how we're using our resources. 71% going to operations, 22% going to capital, and 7% for our debt service. And then this is just a quick percentage-wise breaking those uses into where it's going most, seeing that 61% is going to salaries and benefits and contract services, which would be expected. We are a service organization, so no surprises there. Everything else looks pretty good. So those were the 2025 balances and kind of how they're broken up. So this is kind of a comparison of how it looks compared to what we had budgeted for 2024. So comparing our current request to the revised 2024 budget. On the revenue side, it looks a little shocking. It looks like we're going to reduce by about 59.8 million, or 37%. But what you have to remember is that we have our issuance of debt for the Civic Center. So removing the issuance of debt and the premium on that debt, we're actually projecting an 11% increase, or about 10.2 million increase in projected revenues. The other thing I want to kind of point out that's going to look a little strange when I'm talking about income tax increases, and we'll get into the projection a little bit deeper, but we lay in actual results as we're kind of going through that projection. So I'm going to say that I'm doing a 5% increase, but when it's compared to the budgeted number versus how the projection is, the budget doesn't consider those actual results. So you'll see that those percentages kind of jump around a little bit based on how the actual revenues are coming in.
Anything from council on the topic of all funds revenue change?
Can I just, oh, sorry,
Ms.
clarifying, so you said we'd actually end 11% up, and how do we get from that?
So if you look down towards the bottom, you'll see at the very bottom there's advances in, then transfers in. The two items above that, issuance of debt and premium on debt, that's what when we issued the bonds for the new Civic Center. So
Okay.
those are coming in as a resource. So we have no immediate plans to issue any new debt. So you're not going to see that repeated in 2025 or for the next 5 years in our 5-year projection.
Okay.
So pulling that anomaly out, we're looking at the 11% increase, or 10.2 million.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything further from council? Ms. Bowers?
Yeah, I apologize. This is actually on the prior slide, but the interfund transfers, I'm not, could you explain that for me, please?
Yes. So this is when we're moving resources for various purposes to other funds that are dedicated for another purpose. So the main part of the $7 million is for debt service. So our bond retirement fund is the fund where we pay for all of our debt service. We receive some property tax, but it's not enough to cover all the debt service. So then we make transfers from other funds into the bond retirement fund, so those debt service payments can be made from there. So it's coming from the street fund, the TIF funds, the capital improvement fund, the general fund. So it's moving those resources from one fund to the other fund where the expenses are going to occur.
And the majority, if I'm hearing this correctly, is really revenue funds that make sense, but then just being moved into the debt servicing fund.
Correct. For example, like the street fund. We issued new bonds back in, what was that, 2016 or so, to do some street rebuilds. So the debt service payment is going to happen from the bond retirement fund, but we could use street revenue
Yeah.
to pay for that debt service. So we're going to transfer money from that street fund over to that bond retirement fund, just for the portion that's related to streets that are proper for the street fund to pay for.
Okay. Thank you.
The joys of fund accounting.
Yes.
Sorry, I have this frog in my throat. and I can't get it.
So next, we're going to look at expenditures across all funds, very similar. It looks like we're having this huge decrease in expenses. But again, if you look at that capital outlay number, 1, 2, 3, fourth one down, about 76 million. This is all those bond proceeds that came in for the new Civic Center appropriated and encumbered. So it was encumbered in 2024. We're not going to encumber it again in 2025. It's just going to roll over. So if you do take that out of the equation, there is a 3.8 million increase, or 4%, when you take out the Civic Center appropriations. Salaries and benefits are projected to increase for increased wages for those employees that are currently here, as well as the addition of some staff. And Miranda's going to be discussing that at the next Finance Committee. Going back to capital improvements, excluding the Civic Center items, we're asking for about 11.5 million more for capital purposes, or 104% over 2024. And Kevin's also going to talk about the details of that capital request at the next Finance Committee. Again, as we discussed, there's an increase in transfers out that's associated with the new debt. So this is the first debt service payment, increasing those appropriations. So in 2025, the new debt service, just the portion associated with the 2024 bonds, is estimated to be, or well, is not estimated, is 3.9 million, almost 4 million, with 99% of that coming from the capital improvement fund.
Anything from council on the topic of year-over-year expenditure changes? All right, please continue.
So now we're just going to focus on the general fund. So looking at revenue, expecting an increase of about 3.8 million, or 11%. Most of that is coming from that increase in interest revenue, which again, it's going to start declining. The Federal Reserve already had the first decline in rates at, I think, a half a base point. And then they're just predicting that there's going to be more of that in 2025 into 2026 before kind of normalizing. So again, we got to experience these higher rates, getting some resources, but now things are going to kind of slow and go back to kind of normal levels.
Mr. Weaver?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director. So somewhat relatedly, as rates drop, and as a homeowner, I think in terms of possibly refinancing my mortgage, right? Is that an option when it comes to the debt that we've issued, the bonds that we've issued?
So unfortunately, there was a change to IRS code, maybe also 2018, maybe?
Part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, yeah.
Is that 18? Yeah.
Passed in 17.
17?
Before 18.
Yeah. So basically what they did was they took away a great tool that governments had to advance refund, where we would take advantage of those lower interest rates. Basically, advance refunding or issuing new debt at a lower rate, and then it would sit in escrow, and then that escrow would make those principal and interest payments on that old debt, but it would be considered defeased, like done and paid, and now we're paying the lower interest rate. So when those changes come, they remove the ability for governments to do advance refundings. So our only option for refinancing these kind of bonds would be to do current refundings, where we'd have to look at what's coming due, what bonds are maturing in the next 90 days, and can we swap those out for smaller interest rate debt. But it has to be those things that are maturing within a 90-day time frame called a current refunding. There are some other unique ways that people have tried to do these, because you can do an advance refunding, but you cannot do it on a tax-deferred basis. So now you're issuing taxable bonds to refinance your non-tax bonds, not as attractive to investors. So you usually don't find that interest rate decrease there, because now it's not as attractive to investors. It's going to be at a higher interest rate. So it becomes very difficult to do that and find savings.
All right, thank you very much, Director. Thank you, Chair.
Anything else on revenue before we move over to the
Anything
expense
from
side?
council?
So on the expenditure side, expecting general fund expenditures to increase by about 2.2 million, 3 million, or 7%. Majority of that is coming from salaries and benefits, which Miranda will go over at the next committee meeting. The other increases are fairly small. Any questions on general fund expenditures?
Anything from council?
Just maybe explain the transfer out if you wouldn't mind, just since that's such a large deviation.
Absolutely. So in this particular case, we have a transfer out for debt service, but we also have a $500,000 transfer. We're receiving some savings on our health insurance. So to return that to our employees, we're moving $500,000, transferring it to the Capital Improvement Fund to use for wellness initiatives at the new Civic Center. So thinking wellness equipment, stand-up desks, stuff for the weight room. Miranda could also go into more detail on that as far as the wellness piece. In addition to that $500,000, we also have $215,000 being transferred over for wireless access points at 825. So this was originally included as an IT operating request. I moved it to a transfer out to the Capital Improvement Fund because it is part of the cost of placing that building in operation. So we should capture all those things as that capital cost of getting that building up and operating. So we moved it from operations to a transfer out to the Capital Improvement Fund to make those purchases.
Thank you.
So this is just a nice snapshot of where our resources are going by department. So the public safety makes up the largest part of general fund expenditures, followed by the finance department. The finance department is not large, but we kind of consume all those things that don't fall nicely into just one department. So those citywide initiatives like the transfers out, liability insurance, those things that aren't just pointed towards one department. So that kind of lands in the finance department. After that, it comes Parks and Recreation and then Public Service. So seeing kind of where those resources are being used the most.
Anything from council on the department by department breakout? All right. Please continue.
Okay, so income tax projections and assumptions. So looking at the average employee pay increase for those working in the city of Gahanna landed at 3%. This was based on a recent economic forecast that is predicting that wage increases are going to drop from that 4% where they're currently sitting to about 3%. We're finding that the unemployment and job supply are kind of normalizing, where there's not all these jobs without bodies to fill. So they're seeing that 4% average kind of come down a little bit to 3%. So that's what we're plugging in here. Ortho 1 operations are planned to begin before the end of 2024. Again, talking about that continued growth. I have a small contraction of 1/3% in there because, well, we kind of know what's coming good. We always don't see what's coming bad, right? We don't always know who's leaving. We don't always know who's not getting raises. So this just kind of contracts a little bit to take into consideration those things that maybe we don't know about. And then as we look to 26 and 29, kind of pulling down that increase, and we're going to look at some data as to why we're kind of pulling that down as we're going out into the out years. And then, as I mentioned before, taking collections through the end of September into account to see how that's running up against the 2024 projection, high, low, and then adjusting that estimate based on that. So the next slide kind of shows how all these assumptions and projections are kind of taken into account. So we're anticipating ending 2024 with about $24.4 million in general fund income tax revenue. That translates into about $1.6 billion in wages. Assuming a 3% increase would be about 48.7 in increased wages. We have that net new growth, so what we're expecting in growth, and then kind of pulling it back by that 1/3%. So expecting net new growth of about 26.5 million. Brings us to a wage increase of about 75.3 million. And then calculating that 1.5% for the retained at about 731 million. Net new growth at about 398 million. So our projection is about 1.1 million, a little over 1.1 million in income tax increases to bring us to that $25.5 million number.
Anything from council on the income tax projection? Seeing none, thank you.
So this is just some history, and this shows us a couple things. One, it shows what our wages have done here in Gahanna since 2018. Kind of seeing that big, huge drop in 2020 related to the pandemic, dropping by 7%. That quick rebound in 2021, and then that big slowdown in 2022, and then that big pickup again in 2023, and then kind of seeing where we're normalizing again in 2024 into 2025. So just showing how volatile our base is to pressures outside of the city's control, whether it be something like the pandemic or just the normal cyclical changes in the economic world that happens. Based on our history, about every 10 years, our income tax base gets stressed. So when we're predicting what's going to happen and we're looking at this, we always kind of trail off at those end years because we know how volatile everything is when it comes to income tax and that income tax base. And knowing that we're getting closer and closer to that 10-year period where we might actually have a reduction in our income tax revenue. Looking back even further, 2027 through 2029, that Great Recession, we had 3 years of sharp declines totaling almost $2 million in lost income tax revenue over a 3-year period that quick. So just kind of keeping in mind that, yes, we set these numbers very conservatively, but there's a reason. There's a lot of things that we can't control that impact this base. And then looking at the next slide. So this is a correlation of the wages to income tax collection. So the two slides kind of work together. They just can't fit on the same page together. But if you flip between the two of them, you'll see that as the wage base comes down, so does our income tax revenue. There's a direct correlation to them. The other thing that would be important to look at, as we're kind of setting what these projections are and what they're going to look at, is how much new wages it actually takes to produce a $1 million increase. We have to get to $67 million of new wages to create a $1 million increase in our income tax revenue. So when these projections are going on and we're looking at not how much resources we want to earn, but what can we do based on history and looking at our wages and how things have been increasing, decreasing, and what we believe might happen economically over the next few years.
Anything for Joanne on those two slides? Thank you, Joanne. It's good information.
So then, looking here at the 5-year projection, so we're looking very good over the next 5 years. Again, not requesting to use any fund balance in 2025. Looks like that may not happen until 2027-ish, 2028. And the one thing that I do want to explain about this model is it's basically taking everything that we know today and pushing all that forward for 5 years. So we have an inflationary increase in there for most expenditures of about 3%. For salaries and benefits, we look at our 3-year trend, and then we apply that 3-year trend to all the out years. And then again, seeing that investment income come down. We're still projecting revenue increases, but not as high as we kind of get to those out years. So again, a snapshot. This has changed annually. It's not a request to use anything. It's just, we know looking at this, that when it comes to 2028, 2029, we may need to take a look at operations, or we may need to look at what our resources are doing, and do we need to increase those projections at all?
Anything from council regarding the outlook? All right, please continue.
So this is just a quick view of the Public Safety, Parks and Recreation, Public Service, and Capital Improvement Fund, kind of seeing those changes in revenue. You'll see that on the capital improvement income tax, although the same exact projection was applied and those same assumptions were used, it's showing that there's going to be an 8% increase. Again, taking the planned versus actual through September, we're seeing a little bit more of a percentage increase there. Looking at the 3 special revenue funds, each of these has varying percentages because we do change the allocation based on need from year to year. So what you're seeing with the percentage changes there is the increase along with the change in allocation.
Anything from council?
So this is showing the same thing for those 4 funds on the expense side. I will point out that the public safety looks a little high on the salaries and benefits, but that's related to the timing of a 4th SRO officer. In 2024, it was planned for just a quarter of a year, so this is recognizing 4 SRO officers for an entire year. So that's why that percentage looks a little bit larger compared to the other ones. And then on the public service fund, they're getting their staffing figured out. So as they're figuring out what their actual need is, as they get new hires in and get staffed, they're kind of changing the mixture a little bit. So that's why there appears to be a 3% there. On the capital improvement fund side, again, taking the civic center out of the equation, we're probably about the same increase that we were talking before, asking for about the same amount or a little bit more than what we did last year. Any questions on the expenditure side?
Anything from council? Mr. Weaver?
Thank you, Chair. Director, just because it does look like an outlier on the Public Service Fund contract services, what the difference is there?
So again, this was that 2024, a lot of one-time initiatives. So they had some TRIB mapping, there was some transportation and mobility studies, and some other one-time initiatives that they had asked for in that public service fund that are probably going to bleed over into 2025. And they're not asking for any of those additional one-time initiatives in 2025.
Great, thank you.
Anything further from council? Ms. Bauer?
The same question, just with regard to the Public Safety Fund contract services.
I will probably have to look at that one to see what the revised budget, unless Chief happens to know. I don't, yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that one. I'll have to look into the details on that.
Okay, thank you.
Say, email follow-up okay on that?
Sure, yeah. Or I'm sure it'll come back to us, actually,
Okay.
when you present public safety anyway, so we'll just take a look at it then. Okay.
Perfect.
I want to think that this was the change when we determined that the mental health clinician could not be hired, and we were planning on maybe doing some contracted services for that mental health. And I believe we might be taking a different direction now on that also. But if memory is serving, we had moved some stuff to contract services for those mental health, for that mental health piece.
The chief is nodding his head behind you, so it seems like you guys are remembering the same way.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right, thank you.
And that's all I have, unless you have additional questions for me.
Yeah, just one last time to go around the horn from council. Anything for Director Bury with regard to the operating budget presentation? All right, seeing none. Before we conclude, I just want to revisit the budget calendar that was outlined. So obviously, today we received the operating budget presentation. Next week, we'll receive substantially the same form, but the content, as it's laid out here in the calendar, will be staffing as well as the capital portion of the budget. Is it reasonable that we might get the budget book that day? We're hoping, maybe? Fingers crossed?
Yes, sorry, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we are working diligently on it.
All right, perfect, thank you. So the reason why I mention that is as we can see from the calendar, we're kind of taking the budget, instead of in years past, the entire budget is just sort of, one big package and digesting it at our own pace. We're going piecemeal department by department. So just to kind of revisit this idea of cadence, the 28th, we would reconvene for another finance committee where presumably we would have questions for the administration, or those questions would be answered. Is that correct?
That is correct,
Okay,
yes.
perfect. So on that topic, colleagues, the administration has requested that they receive whatever questions that we might have regarding items to be discussed on the 28th by 9 a.m. on Friday, the 25th. So I just wanted to see if it was okay if we filter those through me. Again, I'll try and summarize as best I can, combine any duplicates, and get those turned into the administration by that deadline. Would 9 p.m. on the 23rd be too tight of a time frame, given that we're kind of taking this more piecemeal this time around? Okay, all right. Is that agreeable with you guys? All right.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, then I guess we'll see you guys back here in a week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thus concludes finance.
Thank you.